I am delighted to open this Peace, Security, and Governance Forum. I am Jendai Fraser, your moderator. The issues we will discuss today are at the forefront of the Africa Leaders Summit and also, importantly, vital to the health and success of democratic agendas across the world. We have much to discuss, and I know we are all looking forward to hearing about some of the exciting innovations and partnerships that African leaders, African citizens, and their societies have implemented to address complex security challenges. To discuss these issues, we have a very distinguished panel that requires no introduction, but I ask if you could please hold your applause until they have all been announced and come up to the stage. It is my high honor and privilege to present to you our host of the Peace and Security Governance Forum, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Hold your applause, please, until they're all, I know you want to applaud, but Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Administrator Samantha Power, and I also want to welcome our distinguished guest, His Excellency President Filipe Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, His Excellency President Mohamed Bazoum, the President of the Republic of Niger, and His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, and also His Excellency, the Right Honorable Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Ahmed Faki. Please stand and extend a round of applause to welcome our speakers today. Thank you all. Thank you all. There will be a group picture, and then we will get started. So maybe we can come in a little bit from your chairs. Yes, please. And thank you. So let's begin. I'd like to get started with Your Excellency President Bazoum of Niger. Mr. President, we know that you have considered deeply the question, how is governance impacted by security? Yes, please. Put on your interpretation. This is for you.
Yes, yours.
Pull it. Okay? Yes? Okay. So, Mr. President, we know that you have considered deeply the question, how is governance impacted by security? How can peace be sustained, especially in the context of violent extremism? No.
I don't have. Speak. Which number?
Which channel is
French.
Trois?
Trois. Voilà, c'est bon, oui.
Wonderful. Okay, let's start again. So the question, Mr. President, is that we know that you've considered deeply the question of how is governance impacted by security? How can peace be sustained, especially in the context of violent extremist non-state actors in the region impacting Niger? Please, sir, share your thoughts on these two questions.
Reprenez, s'il vous plaît. Reprenez-vous. Merci, madame. Je voudrais
Thank you very much. I want to thank the U.S. authorities for the opportunity that was given to us to speak to this audience during these various panels where we will have the opportunity to take the floor on issues of security. I come from the Sahel region, which indeed, for roughly the last 10 years, maybe a little bit more, has been affected by a phenomenon of violence that takes various forms, but that are all similar according to the countries, but is spreading, because we will remember that at the outset it started in northern Mali, but now this threat has reached many other countries. I would like to explain that the violence in Sahel stems from a combination of several factors. Some are structural and some are more temporary in nature. It's one of the most affected areas in the world, most affected by climate change, which has changed a way of life. The pastoral type of communities, the lack of biodiversity now has decreased. Grazing has decreased natural resources, and the Sahel region is also characterized by, unfortunately, a very important demographic growth. So there is less space for grazing, tension over natural resources at the agro-pastoral level, a tendency of the agriculturists, the farmers, to conquer new lands that were previously allocated to grazing, and another contrary trend of the ranchers, as the resources become in the north to become insufficient, to drift down towards the south. And this has created an ecosystem of tensions that is very specific to the area. I was speaking about demographic growth, and I link this to the lack of efficiency in the schooling systems that have not played their role to regulate the demographic growth as it occurred elsewhere in the world. Everywhere else in the world where child mortality was reduced, the rates of childbirth has also decreased, because schools played this role of regulator. Children goes to school, acquire knowledge, and find themselves open to new ideas, find jobs, and this is such that the society becomes more industrial and less rural, and certain practices, certain behaviors, these high rates of natality disappear. In the Sahel, it's true that the vaccination, the policies and prophylaxis against child diseases have reduced, but this wasn't followed or wasn't correlated to a phenomenon that occurred elsewhere in the world, where the demographic growth slowed down. But this demographic growth in our region is also an explanation to the tensions in the Sahel. In addition to all of this, you have to keep in mind that since around 2000, Algerian terrorist groups set up in northern Mali and developed a criminal economy, developed another ecosystem in the area, and it's on that backdrop, on that general backdrop, that there was the fall of the Gaddafi regime, and that many weapons circulated in the Sahel, and the terrorist groups that used to be based in their safe havens in northern Mali spread out in the south in that country. And then we saw the birth of the Boko Haram phenomenon, and those groups have become the monsters against which we now find ourselves fighting today. We in Niger, and to answer to your question, we have considered that this scourge, to face this scourge, we need to combine various actions. The first one is to promote, in spite of everything, and precisely for those reasons, because we have a challenge in front of us. It's to promote democracy, to promote the rule of law, to promote the respect of human rights. Despite our constraints, even if we reserve a greater means to our security, on a political level, this continues to be our goal. And we combine this with capacity building in our military. We have recruited more security forces, domestic security forces, and more armed forces. And we have created alliances around the Lake Chad, the multinational force with our partners from Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria, and the G5 Sahel with our partners from the Sahel, Chad, Niger, Mali, Burkina, and Mauritania. We have also developed partnerships with our friends, the US government, the French government, the governments of European countries writ large, who have allowed us to strengthen capacity in our armed forces by insisting on training special forces that have skills that are adapted to the combat that we are carrying out today. And we had the possibility of acquiring equipment that allowed our armed forces to create the right conditions, to have the right relationship of force, to allow us to not be submerged, because the countries that have not created these conditions saw the institutions affected and were then affected by coups, which disorganized those countries and put them in a situation where they are in even greater difficulties than they when the armed forces took advantage of the difficulties to face the terrorism, to organize the coup against the democratic regimes. So we created the right conditions to give the military the right means on those bases, and we have continued to promote democracy and the rule of law. And in the field, as they are affected by the terrorist groups along our borders, we have set up an institution that we have called the High Authority for Peace Consolidation, that we gave the responsibility to create the conditions for a dialogue among communities, because the terrorists that have set up shop in that area are not trying to manage a state. They're not trying to create an administration. It's not their goals. They are outgrowths of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that are all organizations in the Middle East.
To those issues, I think that you've given us a lot to think about, and especially your emphasis on the nexus between governance and countering violent extremism. So we will certainly return to this topic in the course of today's forum discussion, but thank you for making that strong point about how failures in governance, particularly coups d'etats, have contributed to the problems that your country has faced from violent extremism in the region. So now I'd like to turn to His Excellency Mohamud of the Federal Republic of Somalia. Mr. President, we know that you have recently assessed the security outlook in the Horn of Africa, considering climate shocks, humanitarian issues, conflict, and the threat of violent extremism. How are you reinvigorating the Somali security forces and proactively engaging with the U.S. and international partners to enable Somalia's long-term security? Please share your thoughts with us.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ndai. And the question is a very expansive question, which is very large and we cannot deal with, but let me try. The Somalia has been in a very difficult situation for over 2 decades now, and there are a lot of lessons learned throughout. And in particular, half of this time, the last 15 years, these terrorist groups were in the arena. They were controlling almost the largest portion of Somalia, which is the rural Somalia. 70% of the population of Somalia is living in the rural area as a pastoralists or agro-pastoralists. This is the places where they were controlling Al-Shabaab, getting a lot of revenue, getting a lot of force, manpower, and getting a lot of space to increase their influence, not only in Somalia, but try to in the region as well. So the climate shocks has weakened the society. Poverty, a lack of appropriate food, lack of state services that were not reaching the place, all this put together, the communities become very weak and they become very liable to obey the evil actions of the terrorist groups. The composition of the terrorist groups, they are not one, but some of them are there because of that circumstances that has been created by the environmental shocks that were repeatedly taking place in Somalia in recent years. So just to gain, by the end of the month, less than $100, $70, $60 maybe, was enough to recruit a young boy who was recently married and who got a baby or two, who cannot afford to provide 1 glass of milk for his baby, or a young boy who got an elderly parents at home who are in need. So that desperation has, all of them, they are not there for ideological reasons. The top leadership and the top elite groups are there for ideological pursuit. These are there for economic reasons. There are others who are there for grievances, past grievances that they had. And I'm talking about the experience of Somalia, which might be very different from Niger or Burkina or Mali or any other places where terrorists have been challenging. So in that line, the resistance of the community is broken and they become so obedient to that. So it has taken a long time now. And this was human tendency, that expectation, tomorrow will be better, tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow has been getting worse and worse and worse. Now the people reach it to a saturation point where they say, this is not the option. I have been in the office of the presidency in Somalia in 2012 and 2017 in the past. We liberated many parts of Somalia, those areas. We targeted the districts, the towns, and all these places. But unfortunately, when we liberated those places, they were not accessible. These people, they are in the rural areas, they go to the roads, the highways that link the districts, and they put mines, explosives, ambushes, so impossible. Become the whole. So it was the districts that we liberated in 2013-14 become silos that are standing there separately, that cannot be connected easily unless you fly from one place to another place. So I lost the elections in early 2017, and I've been out for 5 years. Throughout that 5 years, I have been trying to reflect, of course, not me only, but as a team, my political party, my team, the intellectuals and the groups. So we come to the conclusion that unless we change the mindset of our community, unless we raise the awareness of our community, that this cascading negative effects will continue unless they. So we started formula. Shabaab cannot be, or terrorists anywhere they are, cannot be defeated militarily only. Military is a very important component for their defeat. But in the case of Somalia, we decided there are two other important factors or variables that has to be added into the equation, which is ideological war. Shabaab we have in Somalia is a faith-based organization. That's what they claim, hiding themselves in Islam, which is not true. So we decided to establish a campaign that we make our people understand these are not, what they are propagating is not Islam and has nothing to do with Islam. They are a group of mafia covering themselves with a blanket of Islam. So the responsibility of the state and the elite group was to uncover this so that the people can see these are not. So that's one area that we started and organized the community. The other way was economic. They were collecting huge amount of revenue from the local people. Closing those tabs of the financial resources was another target. So this three front war is what's going on in Somalia. And so far, for the last 5 months, what we are receiving is a success. It's not yet complete, but it's a success that motivated the people, and it has created a cascading effect and sense among the society. Those who are not liberated yet, even they are saying now, you see, that party is there and they have liberated themselves. We have to do the same. So this is what is more important now, mobilizing the society. And I have been telling my colleagues today that engaging the society and the community is what makes the terrorists like a fish that run out of water. They cannot exist without the community. And if the community stands up, they have no choice but to run away. And until today, they are running away. Somalia is a large country of 637 square kilometers all over. So it's not an overnight business to finish them, but soon we will see and you will hear definitely Somalia without Al-Shabaab. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your remarks really capture the importance of community-based approaches to security, to governance, and to stability, and how to deliver these democratic dividends. Let me turn now to His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Mozambique. Your Excellency, you heard what the distinguished leaders just highlighted. Both of them have highlighted community-based. They've highlighted the importance of economic dividends to society. How can the dividends of democracy and inclusive governance be enhanced through integration of innovative initiatives to include regional cooperation for peace and security? How can economic and business development levers be used to stabilize communities and sustain peace?
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the Biden administration for inviting us to take part in this dialogue, very productive dialogue. We've had a number of experiences in Mozambique. We had the first internal conflict after gaining our independence, and now we have a problem of terrorism in the northern reaches in Cabo Delgado, in the north of Mozambique. Normally, when problems such as that arises, the tendency is to search for a reason, a motive, and oftentimes studies are undertaken that offer some answers, such as its poverty, unfair distribution of wealth, poverty that leads to crime, that affect there are wealthier and less wealthy areas of the country, but in our country, in Mozambique, what we are currently experiencing in the north, in Cabo Delgado province, is terrorism. And when terrorism started there, no one in Southern Africa had any experience with this. No country had been hit by terrorism up until that point. And so we didn't know if it was terrorism or internal strife or just a group of criminals, of thieves. Well, time ended up giving us a concrete answer, and it's terrorism, plain and simple. Now, how can we combat terrorism? Not only militarily, we have to find the motives so that all the people who are involved in this system can find some comfort. Now, unfortunately, this is a region, the northern region, where we harness oil and gas, where the big mega projects are being built with the discovery of natural gas. And so what we have done is to create an environment in which the whole region is involved. Now, with SADC, we're fighting terrorism, setting a different example, using a multilateral force, working with SADC, and a bilateral force as well. This is a unique case. This is an African problem, and we have to find solutions within our own continent. Naturally, the European Union and the U.S. have supported us in training, namely, but the important thing here is to lay a foundation so that we can train more, educate more young people, create community programs so that young people are busy, are occupied, and they don't see poverty as being a rationale for turning to terrorism, because the message that terrorists send is that, well, you're suffering. We're not going, the government isn't answering your needs, and so fight with us. So that's why we are offering more training in the communities for defense and security at the same time that we are working with the Samim force bilaterally. And we have taken back some of these areas, and now we have the refugee population that is returning. And in this return process, we offer support through schools, hospitals that were destroyed. So this is a joint effort. We need to create forward movement in development for that northern Cabo Delgado region. I stand by for further questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And thank you for pointing out the important role of partnerships, both within the region with SADC and bilaterally, I assume with Rwanda, as well as with the U.S. and the European Union. Partnership is absolutely critical for fighting global terrorism, wherever it shows up in whatever region. So we've heard from our illustrious leaders the challenges and extraordinary commitment it takes at all levels to secure the dividends of peace, stability, and effective governance. Let me turn to one who is no stranger to the complexities of political transitions and the coordination of strategies for peace and security, whether those are between leaders and their societies or across the different communities in societies, the vertical level as well as the horizontal level across these societies. At the African Union, he has played a key role in developing the security architecture to operationalize and sustain stability and good governance. His Excellency, the Right Honorable Musa Ahmed Faki, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, please, sir, you're cordially invited to come to the stage and to the podium and provide key remarks and recommendations. Please stand and welcome Chairperson Faki to the podium. Thank you.
Excellences, Monsieur le Chef d'État,
Excellencies, heads of states and government, ministers, ladies and gentlemen,
السيدات والسادة
I want to start by thanking the organizers of this meeting, my friends, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Secretary,
وزير الخارجية
my dear friend Samantha of Power, the USAID administrator, leads to a number of questions. We have three heads of states here, and their countries are facing terrorism. President Bazoum in the Sahel region, President Mohamed Hassan in the Horn of Africa, and the president of Mozambique in the southern zone. This leads to a lot of reflection. We have to talk about democracy, governance, and peace. And it is useful to start with one note. The establishment in Africa, peace and security architecture and an architecture for governance. In addition to the basic instrument for the African Union and the Constitution, the African system has become richer. You remember that there was the Declaration of Algiers and Lomé when it comes to the changes of government, and there was a chart of democracy and governance that was implemented in 2011. And recently, a few months ago, we established a Declaration of Accra, which led to an incredible summit of the African Union last May, on which dealt with terrorism and the efficient way of fighting anti-constitutional government changes. So we see in our country, 5 African countries have gone through non-constitutional changes. Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, and Guinea. That is a terrible record. And so the peace architecture, which was the expression of our search for African solutions to African problems, and we instituted a panel of wise men, special envoys, and we're waiting for the establishment of a special permanent force. And in view of terrorism, we've established a number of ad hoc missions in the Lake Chad Basin, and then in Somalia, AMISOM, and then in Mozambique with the support of SADC and Rwanda. We also have the G5 Sahelian Force, and recently we have the Accra Initiative, which is probably going to mobilize forces to face terrorism in the Gulf of Guinea. These mechanisms are giving results. So thanks to the African mediation, we have made progress in Sudan, although things were reversed later on. We've had results in Ethiopia. We've established a mechanism to support Libya in the reconciliation process, which is underway. And we have obtained funds to support these processes. We have also on the regional level mechanisms that are being operationalized. What's happening now has to do with democratic change of power. There has been elections organized in a number of African countries. Look at Niger. In spite of its security problems, today there is a change of governments, democratic government. We have a civil society which is expressing itself under very difficult conditions. So in Africa, every day, the people have a stronger commitment to democracy and human rights. But there are still details to settle, and the path forward is not easy. I want to make 3 comments. The first one has to do with the link between governance and the factors of instability of peace. Everywhere where there's no inclusive development and no good governance, then terrorism and anti-constitutional change have taken place. This relationship which exists between terrorism and poverty, and terrorism is a pretext for an anti-constitutional change. And so this should not be accepted. It should be fought against. The second point has to do the obsolescence of the world peacekeeping system. First of all, to maintain peace, peace has to exist. And peace maintenance has changed a lot, and so since we have several operations in Africa, and the results are questionable. The fight against terrorism, the criminality, all of this requires methods that are more flexible, more offensive. And this is why we have to reform the system and transform it completely. The third issue, and I want to stop here, has to do with funding peacekeeping operations. Everyone recognizes the universality of these peace issue. But what happens on the ground? There's a double standard. Everything happens as though the terrorists in the Lake Chad Basin in Mozambique or in the Gulf of Guinea were not the same terrorists as in the Middle East or Asia. So no one is listening to the cries of Africa when it comes to the extension of this scourge. The United States supports a number of African countries on the bilateral level, Niger, Mozambique, Somalia, Chad. But it should be recognized that African armies are still under-equipped. Samantha.
In an old Chadian army helicopter from N'Djamena to Bongo.
The funding of African missions don't lead to anything. So that's the question. This double standard has disastrous consequences for Africa and therefore for peace in the world. To serve democracy in Africa, we must contribute to reestablishing peace and destroying this double standards, this double injustice in Africa. Before ending, I want to talk about the link between peace, security, good governance, and development. If our summit starts giving an answer to these questions, this summit will be a success. Our discussion today will have had a memorable scope, and I hope that this will be the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Faki. Those were extremely important intervention, particularly drawing attention to the need for a new architecture for global peace, stability, and making the point about the nexus between stability, security, and governance so strongly. We thank you for your intervention and look forward to the United States continuing to work very closely with the African Union, which has taken such a leadership role in supporting peace and stability on the continent. So now let's thank you all, again, the illustrious leaders, for your comments. And I'd like to turn now to the cabinet secretaries and have them talk a little bit about partnership with Africa and what the United States is doing. And so let me start with Secretary Austin. First, on behalf of all the participants here and those who will be served by this dialogue, let me thank you for DOD's taking the initiative, working with State Department and USAID and the White House to organize this very important forum on governance, peace, and stability. So my first question is, how does DOD security assistance enable a coordinated 3Ds approach of defense, diplomacy, and development to respond to the shared security concerns and threats on the African continent?
Well, first of all, Ambassador, let me say that I'm delighted to be able to join such distinguished leaders today, and also to be joined by my colleagues, Secretary Blinken and Administrator Power. We're obviously no strangers to each other, because just about every tough problem that we take on and try to address, we are working together, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So we actually live by the 3D model. It is not just a slogan to us, it's who we are and what we do. Let me recognize up front the leading role that African countries play in addressing some of the challenges that are most important to the world. And they include climate change, also strengthening democratic institutions and the protection of human rights. It is clear to us that the countries across the continent are working hard on those issues and many more on a daily basis. And so we recognize and appreciate that. And as we kind of narrowed in on some of the most pressing challenges that that you are facing today, they include the challenges presented by Russia and China, as well as the transnational terrorist challenge that all of you mentioned earlier, and also climate change. So regarding Russia and China, the PRC, we're witnessing the PRC expand its footprint on the continent on a daily basis, and as they do that, they're also expanding their economic influence. The troubling piece there is that they're not always transparent in terms of what they're doing, and that creates problems that will be eventually destabilizing if they're not already. In turning to Russia, we see Russia continuing to peddle cheap weapons. Some of that was mentioned before by one of our senior leaders here. And also, we see Russia employing mercenaries across the continent, and that is destabilizing as well. And so the combination of those activities by those two new countries, I think that bears watching, and certainly I think their influence, again, can be destabilizing. We've already addressed the challenges in part presented by transnational terrorism. Let me applaud the work that's being done in each of the countries. I think you know that we have a small but persistent footprint in Somalia that's working with the president's forces there and doing a great job empowering his forces to address his most pressing issues. But all three countries are helping us, DOD, by allowing us to base some soldiers or some military there in their countries, and so we appreciate that. We appreciate the help that you continue to provide us. As we approach things on the continent, it's the same way we approach things everywhere. The first thing that we always want to do from a department standpoint is develop the right relationships that will be conducive to promoting stability and security. And as we develop those relationships, we want to listen. Want to listen to what's important to the leaders in the region, in the specific countries, and we want to understand what's really important to you. And going further, we want to make sure that we are doing the things to develop and empower your security forces and help you work on your security architecture in ways that you think benefit you, and that certainly will promote regional stability. So we want to make sure that we're doing the things that you think are important, and we want to make sure that we're empowering and enabling your forces to address what you think you need most. And then going beyond that, the next big challenge is, of course, climate change. One of the things that we have done in terms of the United States is we've addressed climate change in our National Defense Strategy, which is our guiding document. And as we interact with other countries, we certainly encourage them to do the same thing, because climate change does a number of things, like causing mass migration in some cases, causing greater competition for resources. We had a great discussion this morning with the president of Niger about the impact of climate change, and it's very, very interesting to hear his insights because they directly match our insights and our concerns. So, you know, it's very interesting in terms of the interaction of these three things: defense, development, and diplomacy. That's the way we live, but it's fascinating to hear our guests, each one of them, make that case that, security, providing additional security alone won't solve the problem. We really have to do the right things in terms of diplomacy and providing assistance and aid to create the long-standing conditions that we're looking for, the long-standing peace and stability that we're looking for. So, and again, I think the president of Somalia made that case very well, as he said, we addressed this with security forces initially, but that did not stand, and it won't stand unless you go back and address the underlying currents. So, defense, in most cases, can set the conditions so that Samantha can come in with the right capabilities to do the right things in terms of development, and clearly it enables Secretary Blinken to come in and do the right things in terms of diplomacy. I don't ever want to see a day when we're not resourcing our diplomats to the full extent that they need to be resourced, because that's going to make me buy more bullets. Because you can't solve every problem with a military solution, and certainly if you're not addressing the long-standing, long-term issues, whatever solution you put into place will not prevail. So this is a way of life for us, and we think it's the way that you have to do business, and it's certainly the approach we're taking on the continent. And I want to applaud all the leaders who are here who have embraced that concept as well. So.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Secretary Austin. And again, the organization of this forum and the leadership of DOD in making this happen is a real testament to that commitment to the continent and to the 3D approach. Secretary Blinken, you have been at the forefront at calling for a shift from reactive and often crisis-driven security approaches in Africa to collaborative and sustainable strategies. President Bazoum has discussed how Niger is confronting immediate and serious threats from terrorism, climate, and extreme poverty, while simultaneously safeguarding the long-term future of his country. Can you speak to the linkage between building and sustaining democratic institutions and good governance and realizing long-term peace and prosperity? What can be practically done through U.S. partnerships, sir?
Jedi, thank you very, very much. And first, it's really an honor to share this platform with the three presidents and also with my friend, the Chairman Faki. They are each evidence of the difference that leadership can make in tackling these challenges. And really, I want to pick up from where Lloyd left off and also reflect on some of the things that I heard our colleagues say and that I took note of. Look, I think the link between actually having sustainable peace and sustainable opportunity and development, good governance, and institutions is very clear. The real question is how to get there, and how to get there in effect when, as our friend from Niger said, you're trying to do it while you're flying the plane at 60,000 feet. And you're trying to do it at a time when virtually all of the challenges we face are interconnected and unfortunately reinforcing each other. And you just heard Lloyd talk about this and others talk about this, whether it is the combination of climate, food insecurity, energy insecurity that in different ways drive migration, drive fights over resources, drive conflict. All of these things reinforcing each other. The challenge for governance is to be able to deal with them effectively in the moment, but at the same time, get the balance right so that we're also dedicating resources, time, and attention to trying to build a stronger foundation of good governance, of strong institutions, of development, not simply emergency humanitarian response. That's what makes peace sustainable. That's what makes opportunity real. So I think one of the things that we're driving at as we're thinking about this with our African colleagues is how do we do this more effectively in partnership with Africa? You heard the Secretary of Defense say this, the solutions that are made just in the United States are not likely to be sustainable. we're focused on listening to our partners. What are their needs? What are local requirements? How do we build together on that basis? That's one critically important thing, and it animates everything we're doing. Second, we're looking at making genuine investments because, again, a response to the immediate is necessary, but it is insufficient and it's not a long-term solution. We're dealing now with a massive food insecurity crisis. It's the product of a lot of things, as we all know. It's the product of climate change. It's the product of COVID. It's a product, unfortunately, of conflict, including Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And so we have an immediate emergency response, especially as we're looking at historic, alas, droughts in different places. We're looking at famine conditions in a number of countries, and the United States has been leading the way on that. But what I've heard time and again, especially talking to African colleagues, we brought together leaders from around the world back in May at the Security Council when we were in the presidency of the Security Council, and focused on food insecurity. And in a session that I had with African colleagues, the thing I heard again and again and again is, yes, we need to address the emergency situation, but what we want even more is a genuine investment in our own productive capacity and our own self-sufficiency. So that's driving, for example, the Feed the Future program that we have. It's driving a lot of the work that we're doing around the world. Same thing on global health. We've gone through this pandemic, and what we know from that is it's insufficient simply to deal with the immediate challenge. We have to help put in place and have to help Africa put in place the foundations to be able to deal with that themselves going forward so that there's not a reliance on others to build the productive capacity. So we've helped establish from South Africa to Senegal the capacity to, for example, produce vaccines in Africa for Africans. We're investing in young people. As everyone knows, majority of population in Africa is young. We have been going back to initiatives that President Obama started, invested in young African leaders. There are now 700,000 young Africans who are part of the YALI network virtually. It's incredibly powerful because it's building connections between them, among them, and building out partnerships for the future. A big piece of this is the investments we're making in women and girls, something we can talk about at greater length. And then finally, I would say there's no one model of good governance. There's no one model for how to build strong institutions. I think we have to be informed by each other. We have to be informed by local conditions, local needs. And from the perspective of the United States, this is also not about a competition with others. This is not about saying to our friends and partners, you have to choose. This is about offering a genuine choice, offering a genuine partnership, and hopefully together building a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. That's what we're animated by. We put out a strategy for sub-Saharan Africa a few months ago, and it really does bring together the three pieces that are represented here. The last thing I'll say is this. It's interesting, when you're in the Situation Room, as you know very well, oftentimes the diplomats are saying, gosh, we could use a little bit more defense and security or a little bit more development. And then the Secretary of Defense is saying, we need some more diplomacy to deal with this. And so we're constantly playing off of each other, but it's really increasingly in response to what we're hearing from our friends, from our colleagues, from our partners. That's what's animating us. That's the only way I think we're going to be successful in building this plane as our friends are flying at 60,000 feet.
Yes, thank you very much, Secretary Blinken, and thank you very much for putting the emphasis on the quality of the partnership, the content of that partnership, the nature of that partnership, and what the United States is doing to build it with all of Africa. Now let's turn to administrator power. Many countries, including those represented in this session, face diverse challenges that contribute to uncertainty and ripen the environment for instability and conflict. We've heard about those already, including economic crisis, food insecurity, governance challenges, and a fracturing of social cohesion. USAID has demonstrated an early commitment to partnerships and development as an essential component of a holistic, integrated response. How has this approach been applied in areas to prevent the further spread of instability, and what lessons have been learned to prevent the spread of violence and extremism.
Thank you so much, Jendai, and thank you for your leadership over so many years in this space. I mean, it's evident today, your fluency in these issues, but you've really put it all on the line in your career, and so thank you. And thanks, so honored to be among these heads of state who are leading in this space and bringing a more holistic and integrated approach themselves, recognizing the impossibility of silos. Chairman Faki, about that helicopter, you said it was safe at the time. So I'm not sure now, nearly 20 years later, that I'm getting the memo that that wasn't quite the case. And just to underscore what Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin have stressed, which is the inextricable links and the inextricability of these issues, development, diplomacy, defense. I often talk about it like a three-legged stool, where you can have economic opportunity, if you're lucky, and governance, you can aspire to those things, but if you don't have security, the stool is going to topple over. You can have security and hope for economic opportunity for all these young people on the continent, but if you don't have governance, it's going to make it very challenging to sustain security and economic gains over time. And so too, there absolutely has to be an economic dividend on security consolidation and on governance, when you have leaders in place who are trying to deliver for their people. I just wanted to make 3 points here beyond that. The first is on the centrality of governance. And I think it's really important that we heard from the chairman the reference not only to Africa's peace and security architecture, but the recognition of the connection between security and the anti-coup policy that the African Union has taken for so long. The recognition that norms and standards and justice in the wake of conflict or in the wake of atrocities, how important that is, how challenging it has been to deliver, but nonetheless that standard setting is so important from the UN, but also especially closer to home from the AU. So thank you for your leadership on that. It's so, so important. But when you think about the vicious cycle of the relationship between governance and security as it tends to play out. So let's say you get lackluster governance, there's corruption, a government may have not come to power legitimately or may have extended itself in perpetuity. Popular discontent rises, maybe people come out to the streets. In a situation where the rule of law is shaky or you see democratic backsliding, what is the first tool in circumstances like that? Often, security forces taking a heavy hand with the people who are coming out, wanting more for themselves, more for their kids. Then what happens if a crowd is fired on, as has happened in so many countries, in so many parts of the world, certainly not just in Africa, there tends to be the excessive use of force, not the accountability around the excessive use of force. Does that ever work, really? I mean, do people really ever go home? Well, maybe then it's a more heavy-handed approach, but more likely more people come out to the streets. Then, here we are with initiatives like Prosper Africa, trying to gin up enthusiasm among the diaspora to bring their businesses back home to Africa, to try to attract private sector investment. The Development Finance Corporation, which both state and USAID, our state is the chair of the board of the DFC, USAID is the vice chair, trying to hustle up patient capital. And yet, what happens when you start to see that doom loop with governance, the excessive use of force? It just gets harder and harder. And same with corruption. Fundamentally, it's not something that can be pushed off to the side. If we're serious about drawing the kind of economic investment that we want to see on the continent, that too has to just be so central to the governance agenda, to the rule of law. So just to say, everything is connected to everything else, but it's very hard to see our way out of security conundrums and economic difficulties of the kind we see today without governance reform of the kind that I think the leaders up here are championing and others are as well, but we have to be honest, the trends are not great. And many say, oh, but in tough economic times, governance can wait. No. If we're going to address these economic headwinds, these issues have to be tackled in parallel. Second point, just very briefly, is Jendai asked the question about programming around extremism and conflict resolution and so forth. We have a lot of programming branded as such. But I think the way we have to approach it at USAID is in this much more holistic way. I mean, Tony mentioned Feed the Future, our flagship billion-dollar food security program, which is about helping farmers get access to satellite data from NASA so they know the quality of their soil, giving them seeds, drought-resistant seeds, heat-resistant seeds, so they can better withstand climate change. I mean, that's an investment in counter-extremism. Fundamentally, that's about livelihoods, that's about economic opportunity, it's about withstanding the effects of climate change. PEPFAR, flagship program, that's an investment fundamentally in preventing radicalization. Remember when life expectancy in so many countries was in mid-30s for some, in some communities? That was not, I remember actually DOD coming out and speaking about HIV/AIDS and the threat actually it posed to security because life was so short and so fleeting in those circumstances. So, and climate change programming. I mean, you cannot talk about any of the issues, and everybody has touched upon this in some way, but as these pastoralist livelihoods shrink and shrivel up, and we ask major questions now about the sustainability of that lifestyle in places where it has lived and thrived for millennia. Our efforts together to partner with you, following your lead to figure out what is the transition for those communities now, how do we bring that about? So it's just that we can't think about security programming and counter-extremism programming without thinking about the ecosystem, and President Bazoum mentioned the ecosystem of tension, but really it's the ecosystem of development that has to envelop communities that are grappling with these, really, really difficult circumstances right now in many cases, and that have so much dynamism and potential that just needs to be unlocked. Third and final point is just to end because I was just in Somalia visiting the president and his team not so long ago, a couple months ago, where again, the country is facing fifth straight failed rainy season, breaking all records, potentially heading into a sixth. This is the climate. And it's even to say shock anymore, I'm not sure. I think a shock has to be this, but when a shock is a constant, I'm not sure it counts as a shock anymore, but this perennial climate drain on the entrepreneurship and dynamism, again, of the people of Somalia, the people of all the countries that we've been talking about here. And yet, against that very, very difficult backdrop, to see the security forces with Secretary Austin's team's support, to see the diplomacy that you have done, Mr. President, coming out and saying, we will be at peace first with our neighbors and with ourselves. We'll be at peace with our neighbors and ourselves. I love that. And to have the Secretary's team backing that up, trying to coordinate donors who are going, as always, in a million directions, rather than necessarily, squaring up our investments with your needs, which is what we must be doing. But as you have launched these successful military operations, the point you make again and again, how critical it is to come in and make sure that there is livelihood support. What is stabilization? Yes, stabilization is security for sure, but it's again the 3 Ds, and it's those 3 legs of the stool. And so figuring out as a broader international community that wishes to see an end to radicalism and an end to al-Shabaab and an end to the terrorist groups that are terrorizing so many innocents in these countries and beyond, it is going to take bringing all tools in the toolbox together at the right time and not missing opportunities like those that exist when the defense and the diplomacy come together. And so that is our need is not only to do it ourselves with our resources, which we are doing, but to get other countries to see that this is an opening, and it can be proof of concept for how it can be done elsewhere. But we have to seize that opening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Administrator Power. Thank you very much for your engagement and your leadership of USAID. We know how much the men and women of USAID are doing on the ground in Africa. And they are often the first face of the U.S. policy and U.S. diplomacy and U.S. development, all of it. So thank you very much for your leadership. Now we have just about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to do something that it's dangerous, but I want to do it in terms of time management. I would like to give the leaders at least 1 minute each to reflect on anything that you think is necessary in terms of the partnership and the engagement that you just heard from your hosts, our cabinet secretaries. But please, just 1 minute or else I'm in trouble. So we'll start with President Nyusi. Nyusi, please.
Bom, muito obrigado. Minuto. Eu tinha oferecido mais 5.
Well, thank you very much. But what I would like to say at this moment is very important. We're evaluating that you need to invest for peace and for the involvement of everybody, invest in democracy. And we expect everything to happen for Africa and Europe at the right moment. And we need the investments and direct investments to our economy. And this investment, they have to touch human capital, which is essential for all countries and to develop men and women in our countries. And that's what I would like to add.
I'm not far away from His Excellency the President, what he said, investing the human capital. Investing in peace is true, but investing the human capital is the best option. And this is a very serious challenge to Africa, particularly where the fiscal capability or the revenue capability is very limited. Providing service delivery to the people, increasing the quality of education and health, and issues like that is very important. Investing the civil society groups. These are the issues where changing the mindset of the society is the fundamental issue. That is the bottom, that if you push, so many things will change. And I think it is the people whom we need to concentrate. How do we change the mindset of the people?
Thank you, sir. President Bazoum, please.
Merci, Madame. Moi, je n'aurais pas insisté plus que je ne l'ai fait sur la qualité de notre coopération militaire avec les États-Unis, s'agissant de l'insécurité qu'il faut encore renforcer. J'ai souligné 2 défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés, c'est celui du changement climatique. C'est une question qu'on ne peut pas traiter que dans le cadre d'une relation bilatérale avec un pays, fût-ce les États-Unis, qui ont de grandes capacités. Ces discussions que nous menons dans le cadre du débat.
It's a conversation that we need to carry out in the international debate on climate change, how the US can intervene with all their might to ensure that countries such as ours that need to promote their agriculture because we have a lot of water resources can have access to the credit that will allow us truly to have a renewable energy in a sizable manner and education in our countries. We need a general mobilization in order to promote education and fight against demographic growth. We need to teach young girls. Girls need to go to school, stay in school, so that this slippage that we have undergone of this huge demographic growth, which affects all our opportunity to ensure development in our country, to be able to confront that challenge. Thank you.
President, and this has really been an excellent dialogue. Just to end with a couple of the highlights, the necessity of good governance to counter violent extremism with an implication that the coup regimes will fail to deliver security and peace. Another one is that international partnership is key to support African security capability, with the implication that there's a requirement for innovation and an alignment with Africa's priorities. And then finally, inclusive development is a required ingredient for stability and can be accelerated by regional cooperation and strong quality international partnerships. Please join me in thanking the leaders and the secretaries for, again, such an outstanding dialogue. It is the middle of the dialogue because I know all of them have already been engaging. This now includes all of this forum, and then we'll continue to carry it forward. Thank you very much. Thank you.